quickly, and then it sort of, from the windows, it spread up the back of the building and entered the other floors.
Richard Toomey says there has been structural damage to the building and it will have to be closed for repairs. He says luckily no one was injured. Senior lecturer Rosita Thomas was inside the building when the fire started.
While I was having my breakfast in my office, I heard the fire alarm, and it was a long, prolonged alarm, and I thought that this is not a joke.
Ms Thomas says it was only when she left the complex with about 6 other staff members and saw the smoke that she realised how serious the fire was.
I was a little scared because this is the first time I'm seeing a real fire this close, and that also it's because it's our building.
Whitireia has cancelled all classes today. Everardo Morera, who studies IT there, says he turned up this morning to chaos.
I came here and there are a lot of smoke, black smoke, getting out of the building, and then I cannot enter in the university because it was a fire.
Queen Street between Merrill Drive and Karangahape Road was closed for some time, but reopened after midday. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, Kōjisi Changaho.
Almost 6:19, a massive air and sea search involving 5 countries is underway for a missing Argentinian submarine in the South Atlantic. All contact with the Navy sub San Juan, which has 44 crew on board, was lost last Wednesday. It was last known to be 430k from the southernmost tip of Argentina. Bad weather has been hampering the search. This is a kind of a nightmare, isn't it? The ABC's Anne Barker has this report.
Submarine crews, by their nature, are trained to evade detection, but efforts to find the San Juan and its 44 crew have turned into a multinational military operation. The German-built sub was on a routine mission when it disappeared off the radar, though a series of failed satellite calls intercepted at the weekend have given hope the crew are alive. Captain Enrique Balbi is a spokesman for the Argentinian Navy. 7 call attempts of a few seconds, possibly a very low signal, which were not finalised. He says that information is still being checked to get concrete data on the sub's location. We'll continue working with triple the effort as we're doing. Navy protocol calls for a submarine to surface immediately if communication is lost, but the San Juan was travelling 2,000 miles up the Argentinian coast and could be anywhere in a vast stretch of ocean. Its last known location was 430 kilometres off the country's southern tip, but Navy Rear Admiral Gabriel Gonzalez said bad weather is complicating the search. The weather in the area continues to be very difficult, he says. Right now we have waves of 6 to 8 metres high with west to southwest winds of 40 knots. Unfortunately, these conditions are expected to remain for the next 48 hours or so. A massive search is now underway involving at least 5 nations. The US has sent sophisticated undersea rescue equipment, and its Antarctic patrol ship, HNS Protector, has been diverted to the South Atlantic Ocean. Captain Enrique Balbi. We're already in the area of operations, sweeping the zone, looking both on the surface and underwater, because we won't rule out any hypothesis. One man trained in detecting submarines is Andrew Davies, Director of Defence and Strategy at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra. He says solidarity among submariners will mean crews around the world will be waiting in hope that the San Juan crew are rescued alive.
Submarines, of course, their main asset is being hard to find once they're submerged. So that's a double-edged sword when you have something like this where you're looking for a submarine that might be underwater.
How long do you think the sub could last with oxygen on board?
Depends what else is going on board. If there's been a fire, that consumes a lot of the oxygen.
How much does this remind you of the Kursk disaster in Russia in 2000?
Well, the Kursk disaster was a bit different because the Kursk, we know now, had suffered several on-board explosions, and a small number of the crew had managed to survive for a while. But unfortunately, in part of the submarine where escape was impossible. So we have the benefit of hindsight with the Kursk, so we know what happened. In this case, we have very little idea.
It's Andrew Davies there, ending that report from the ABC's Anne Barker. It's 6:22. So much feedback coming in tonight on Bob Sincock, Nigel Murray and the Waikato DHB. Thank you. We'll have a sample of it before the end of the program, but we're going to use a lot of it to help us continue our investigations into what exactly happened and why Nigel Murray was able to do what he did for so long. As Kiwi Rugby League fans lament New Zealand's dismal World Cup campaign, Pacific Rugby League is on the rise. Both Tonga and Fiji are through to the semi-finals of the tournament, while the only thing looming for the Kiwis is an independent review of just where it all went wrong. The rise of the Pacific nations at the tournament has come off the back of several lead players opting out of playing for New Zealand and Australia and going with their countries of heritage, prompting some to label them effectively traitors, although, by golly, those countries like Tonga and Fiji have had things very much stacked against them for a long, long time. Our sports editor Stephen Hewson sifts through the wreckage of the Kiwis tournament and the rise of the game in the Pacific.
And Fiji are into the semi-finals, a famous victory here. Extraordinary match and a tournament that started so promisingly for New Zealand has ended in disaster.
As Kiwi fans wondered where it all went wrong, Fiji fans celebrated. After a shock loss to Tonga in their final pool match, the Kiwis lost 4-2 to Fiji, to be dumped out of the World Cup at the quarter-final stage at the weekend, their worst ever performance at the sports showpiece event. So where did it all go wrong? Ahead of the tournament, the star NRL forward Jason Taumalolo, born and raised in Auckland, opted out of the Kiwis, deciding to play for his country of heritage, Tonga. The Kiwis were also missing former captain Jesse Bromwich and fellow player Kevin Proctor, both banned by coach David Kidwell from the tournament after a drugs bust earlier in the year. How badly did they miss them though? On the face of it, hugely. And coach David Kidwell's future's now in limbo.
It's not a short-term fix. The Pacific nations, they've stepped up. Their community, they come out and support their teams. We've got to make sure that we're performing on the field so we can fill those stadiums with Kiwi supporters. But you just look at some of those stadiums, the one in Hamilton, was covered in red. We've got to do our job on the field to make sure that the stadium's in black.
Chief Executive of New Zealand Rugby League, Alex Hayton, maintains the Kiwis aren't broken, but concedes the code will suffer locally, even if it means the game's developing internationally.
If we want to have a competitive international game, which is what we're trying to do in growing rugby league, at some point you're going to have to wear some losses. But
former rugby league commentator and professional player Peter Ropati says it's obvious the problem's a lack of leadership.
There's something not right in the team. There's something that's terribly, terribly wrong. And when I listen to David Kidwell, and I feel for the guy, he's so out of his depth. He has absolutely no idea on how to deal with it.
Ropati says the Rugby League World Cup has changed.
The bulk of the players now are made up of professional footballers. Gone are the days where you might find half the squad are made up of guys that are playing out of Nuku'alofa or playing out of Apia. 99% of them are either involved in the NRL or Super League, so they're quality footballers.
The Fiji coach Petero Sivnasiva, who represented both Australia and Fiji, hopes this tournament's just the start of the rise of Pacific Rugby League.
Could be the start of something really big within rugby league. That we've seen the dominance of those Tier 1 nations for quite some time, but now and I think it all started on the back of players wanting to step away from representing Tier 1 nations to go back and honour their heritage. I think that sends a real powerful message.
Jason Taumalolo copped a backlash when he belatedly decided to play for Tonga rather than New Zealand at the tournament. But Damon Salesa, who's an associate professor of Pacific Studies at Auckland University, says the Pacific community's been moved by the decisions of many players to opt for their countries of heritage, giving up the opportunity in all likelihood of winning the World Cup and the chance of making more money.
Many of the people I'm around, and myself included, have been really moved by the decision, particularly the players who would have made the front line of both Australia and New Zealand. Their decision to play for their ancestral Pacific homeland has been really moving. They've put their connection to their homeland above the money they could have made and even perhaps their chance at winning a World Cup.
Damon Salesa says while many players who opt to play for Pacific countries may have been born in New Zealand, they feel more connected to their homeland.
If you actually walk the streets of a